We're talking today about uprising. Exactly what is an uprising? What is a uprising that comes and we see even today going on around the world? In fact, in so many ways, it has become a norm now in society. They say, let's take it to the streets. Let's go out and demonstrate. Let's go out and revolt. What's exactly what the word uprising means? It means revolt. It means to rebel in English, to come up against, to rise up against something that we don't agree with or that we want to push a cause for or an ideology. So let's break this down. I'm going to give you two meanings of uprising that I think is very interesting. So it's a revolt against authority. And one of the first words for uprising in Arabic is intifada. Now, intifada means to rise up and bring change. Not necessarily at times in a good way, but to bring change. And then there's the Hebrew word mired. Mired means the same thing as infitada. Infitada means the same thing as uprising. There is no difference in the foundation of the meaning. Same thing as revolt. And so over the years, we've seen these uprisings come and begin to come out. Now, are uprisings good for God's people, as myself, we, the people of God, are uprisings to our benefit or against us? Well, let's break that down and let's see. Because it is mentioned further on down, which we'll read in the Bible. Let's talk about some uprisings that rose up. We can't hit every single one, but we can talk about some. Even recently, not too long ago, a few years back, when the COVID came out, there was uprisings in Europe that began to rise up, and people began to demonstrate. And they said, no, we don't want any more lockdown in our homes. And it brought change. It brought change. So let's see if some of these uprisings are good, and where do we stand as God's people. In the 1960s, there was a civil rights movement. Now, I'm mentioning these to you. I can't mention everyone, but I'm bringing these to you because I want to show you how important this is and where these uprisings start, because there's a specific place that they started. So in 1960s, there was a civil rights movement, which brought able for black people, as myself and others, to vote and have freedom in America. That was in the 1960s. Between the 60s and 70s, there was the Vietnam War protest, and that went on for at least quite a few years as this war extended. In 1964, in University of California, Berkeley, and there's a reason why I mentioned that name, is because of the free speech movement, that we should have free speech, and that was an uprising. There was the Black Lives Matter protest that went on because of the killing of, for example, George Floyd and others innocently killed, or I should say in many ways killed by police, maybe not in the best. Then in 2023, we had the Palestinian protest. It's a pro-Hamas protest where students got together. Notice what I said, students came together among many universities, large universities around America and other parts of the world. Now, why am I bringing this out to you? Because most of these protests begun on college campuses across America and other parts of the world. Now, the civil rights movement and the Black Lives Matter basically started in the inner cities, or we would say today the ghettos and so forth, and on the streets, and it was taken out. And then colleges, of course, picked it up, universities, and went with it. But many of the other ones I told you, and more today, have begun in university campuses. So this gives you an ideology, a thinking. This type of uprising is a thinking and an ideology of how people's minds are being transformed. Their minds are being set. So where do we see uprising today? And what does the Word of God, what does the Bible say about that? You must say, well, it really doesn't matter. Yes, it does matter, because ultimately God will have the last say. Whether uprising is for the good or for the bad, God will have a last say. That's just the way it is. He is the one who says the way things ultimately will end up. So what does the Bible say? Well, let's pick a very specific example found in Exodus chapter 3. And in Exodus chapter 3, what do we have? We have the children of Israel who are bound in Egypt, who are slaves and they're being oppressed. And there needs to be an uprising for them to come out because Pharaoh won't let them go. You know the story. If you went to Sunday school, you should. Moses comes in, God calls him, he comes and speaks to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, no, I'm not going to let them go. Well, Exodus 3:7-8, let's read it. And the Lord said, I have seen the oppression. So what starts an uprising, or what should start an uprising, is oppression of my people who are in Egypt. Now, before you jump on that and think every oppression should be an uprising, let's get this right. And the Lord said, I have seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrow. So we see here there are three major things in this verse that causes a right uprising: oppression, taskmasters, sorrows. Many uprisings today, even recently, has not been the foundation of sorrows. Maybe the foundation of rebellion, or a foundation of anger. We saw recently in 2023 when Hamas went into Israel to prove a point. And that's what they try to do, to prove a point. They knew they couldn't take all of Israel, but they went in there to prove a point and to show that, yes, that they claim that they, as Palestinians and so forth, have been oppressed. Now, I want to say something to you. You don't take violence to prove that you are being violated. You don't do that. That's not what God says here. Violence only comes in, or I should say a cleansing comes in, when you're coming up against an enemy that needs to be removed. We see that in the Bible. God told the children of Israel, when you go into that place over there, remove that enemy, because if you don't remove the enemy, they will come back and they will kill you. So we have to understand that uprising, a proper right uprising, comes through oppression, it comes through taskmasters, and it comes through sorrows. It's interesting that it was Yeshua, Jesus, who said the Bible says he was a man of sorrows. He carried our sorrows. He took our slavery, and he was oppressed upon the cross. Now we pick up here in verse 8. So I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from the land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, I want to draw on this because this is very important, because we don't see that Egypt was killed by the Israelites. We see that God came down, brought judgments upon Egypt, and then the Israelites were told to go free, or they walked out free. That, my friend, is a righteous God uprising. It is God who steps in, and he still does today, and brings, it might be a personal uprising in your life, and brings a victory. He does the setting things in order. He does the judgment, and then we in faith trust him and move forward. When uprising begins to become violent, when uprising begins to become angry, and you begin to be threatened, or you are threatened, or you threaten those that you are against to bring harm upon them, my friends, that is not the right uprising. And today we're seeing that's the way that mankind wants to go. It seems like now it's the norm to be devastated, to destroy. For example, when we had the uprising and the riots and the demonstrations against the brutality of police against black men, there were people's businesses who were damaged. Innocent people who had nothing to do with what was going on. Their places were damaged. Some of them, like I said, were never recovered. People were hurt. Innocent people were killed or shot by snipers. And we could keep going on. Yes, in a way, the atrocity, the terrible actions of picking and killing black men was not right. But what I'm saying to you, a proper uprising in God is God brings the judgment, and then we receive the liberation. Uprising that brings harm and hate and begins to bring slander and put people down, that, my friend, is a wrong uprising. And if we get caught in that, I want to say to you, God is not pleased. We pick up here in 1 Kings 12, 19 through 20. Now I'm going to show you why I said this in the end. So what am I saying in this area? Yes, there can be a right uprising. We saw it in the civil rights movement. Now let me just say this. No uprising is going to be perfect, especially when man is involved. There are going to be situations in uprising that men will never be perfect. You're going to get bad apples. You're going to get troublemakers coming in there. So we see in an uprising, you're going to have some bad people coming in. But the core foundation of that uprising should be to bring attention to what is not righteous. And that's exactly what the Lord did with Pharaoh and Moses. Moses came to him. God warned Pharaoh about the judgments. Pharaoh would not listen. And so the judgments kept going and going. And I want to say this. Pharaoh could have stopped the demise of what was going on. Pharaoh could have stopped the oppression that was going on upon his people. When I say the oppression in respect of the judgments God put forth, he could have stopped it. But no, he was determined. And that's why you have uprisings. People who are not satisfied begin to rise up. But again, it must follow the principle of what God says. Now, I know that many listening, many watching, have their own different views and so forth. I can only tell you what God says in His Word. And that, to me, stands supreme. No matter what somebody thinks or how they feel, it stands supreme. Our opinions don't change God. We may have an opinion of God, we may have an ideology of God, a theology, but it does not change God. God is the one who brings judgment upon people who have walked in unrighteousness, and it causes an uprising, and we're going to have more as time goes on. 1 Kings chapter 12. Israel rebelled against the house of David to this day. This is verse number 19, one of the most important chapters and verses in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, in the Torah, in the Haftorah. One of the most important verses we need to see today, 1 Kings chapter 12 and verse number 19. What did Israel do? They rebelled against the righteous leadership of God. This is what they did at that time. They went against it. And they begin to call Jeroboam as their leader, who was an evil man. And it came to pass, when all Israel heard that Jeroboam was come again, that they sent and called him to the congregation, made him king over all Israel. And there was none that followed the house of David, but the tribe of Judah only. So what uprising do you have here? This is an uprising that was led by somebody who God had not approved. It was not a God-approved uprising, and this uprising caused the demise at that time and the separation and division of Israel. Something that God did not have in His heart, even though He knew they would do it. He's God. Something that was against the will of God, and this uprising brought an evil response, a wicked response, and most of Israel at that time turned their back upon God by not serving in the house of David, the king of Israel. And so they raised up. This is Solomon's sons who have now come up and now raised up. And we see here now that they refused to walk with the house of David, Solomon being his son. Through Rehoboam, they decided to go with Jeroboam, as we would say in English, and they begin to press forward, and that was a rebellious uprising. Now, let me close with this because it's important to lay the foundation. Again, some uprisings are definitely of God. God has ordained it, and God is in it, and God will fight our battles. But many we see today have no God sense, they're nonsense, and they're nothing but violence to bring hurt, to bring racial discord, to bring cultural discord because of the way we think. Every human being, let me just say this, all across the board, has a right to live upon this earth. Now, we might not agree how they live, where they live, why they live, but every human being. We need an uprising in Africa, as many innocent. Look in Congo, 70 Christians were beheaded by ISIS. Now, that should call an uprising. But we don't see that. And all across, we've seen over in Nigeria and other places and over in Somalia where innocent people, tribes are being killed and nobody's uprising. Nobody's standing up and saying, hey, this needs to stop. This needs to stop because that's unjustified. Whenever it comes to God's people or Christians, we're usually pushed off and said, those are just Christians. But see, God has given even the evil man the right to live now. If you're looking in the world and you see wicked people, they are still living and God allows them to live. If I was God, I wouldn't, but he does. So uprising comes. They're proper uprisings that are significant to bring change. And they're uprising that what happened to Israel, where they followed wicked people. You see, a evil, wicked uprising will bring nothing more than evil. And whatever your thoughts are, political theology, if you are for an evil uprising, it will bring wickedness. It is controlled and dominated by Hasatan or Satan himself. Proverbs 24, 21 through 22. Let me close with this. My son, fear the Lord, look at the order, and the king. Do not associate with those given to change. So uprising is supposed to bring change. But watch this. Because their calamity will rise suddenly. And who knows the ruin those two can bring. So we see here in Proverbs that here he's warning, Solomon's warning us, do not associate with those who bring the wrong change. It's going to be calamity. It's going to be atrocities. It's going to be terrible. What we have today, beloved, are people that we should not associate with because their change is evil. They only have one purpose in mind. I don't have to get into all the details. You see it going on in the Middle East. You see it going on around the world. There are people today who have an evil agenda. I don't care if it comes out of college. And when that mindset gets in, it begins to bring down a nation and a people. Because you're not fighting a system, you're fighting an ideology. And an ideology, I should say, comes from an idea, a thought. The best way I could say, like the thought that Satan gave Eve. You see, Satan, it was the serpent who gave Eve an ideology that God was holding everything back from her, that she could be like God if she partook of the tree. This, my friend, is a wicked and adulterous and evil idolatry. And the Bible warns against that today. And we see today in the world, we see it going on all over. Some uprisings were good. Some made sense. Some started off good, went bad. But many today are nothing but evil and wicked and trying to come up against innocent people who have nothing to do with a person's plight. And so we need to get this in our heart as God's people to be focused and know. Don't agree with every uprising you see coming up here. As the Bible says, test the spirits and see if they're of God or not. But if you really want a righteous uprising, rise up for Jesus. Rise up for the cause of Christ. Rise up for the gospel, the good news. Rise up and bring salvation, miracles, and deliverance to the people. And when you do that, you will know that God is moving in a great way. And he will stand with us just like he took the children of Israel out of Egypt. Today, he's bringing us out of the spiritual Egypt. And that uprising, my friend, is the greatest uprising and the best uprising that will bring eternal victory and shalom peace in our life.